After the 2016 election, like many people of my liberal ilk, I was devastated and shocked, and I was confused. I did not go into the catatonic stages that many of my friends did. I was like, we've got to do something. I don't understand what happened. And so my solution to trying to understand was I started inviting people who voted for Donald Trump to my house for dinner. And I would make dinner for them. And I would say, hey, I just want to talk to you and try to understand. And people came. And I just kept doing that over and over. That very first dinner, we argued like right from the minute people came in the door. I didn't actually know them very well. In fact, I didn't know them at all. They were friends of friends. And we just argued right from the beginning. And so I kept doing these dinners over and over. But each time I would experiment with some way of connecting a little bit better. For example, like at the very next one, I told people they couldn't talk about politics until I said it was okay to talk about politics. They had to get to know each other. And that worked, but it was awkward. And so at the next dinner, I gave people little question prompts to help them get to know each other. Sometimes people just need a little prompt. And then once, that helped. And then I experimented with different kind of prompts. The interesting thing is after a while, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like I work in the arts, and art is an amazing way to get people to talk to each other. And so I started using more artsy kinds of ways to create more dialogue. And so I just kept doing that over and over until a couple years into it, I curated a small art show at a museum here in DC the museum is called the Hyrick House Museum. And I curated an art show called A Good American. And I asked 7 DC-based artists to answer the question, what does it mean to be a good American? And we put the art in this small museum, and I invited 50 people to come from across the political spectrum. So now it wasn't just like Trump supporters versus Trump haters. It was just people from across the political spectrum having a dialogue. And actually that was more interesting than the us versus them kind of conversation, because in America, most people fall along the spectrum. Of course there are people on the ends, but those, that's the minority of people on either end, arguing and being very loud about their arguments. Actually, most of us fall somewhere in between. In fact, there's this really great study called Hidden Tribes that was also very life-changing for me in terms of how I looked at these conversations. That study says that 70% of Americans are in between these polarized extremes, and we're called the exhausted majority because we're so exhausted by the arguing that's happening between the extreme sides. And it's sort of inherent in being in the middle is that you're not super loud, and so those voices were not being suppressed, but they were definitely not being heard. Our media would have us believe that we are more polarized than we actually are, because these stories of people actually wanting to talk to each other are not as interesting. The business of media is based on conflict. They make more money when there is more conflict. And so sharing the stories of people actually talking to each other is not as interesting. Being a bridge builder sounds easier than it actually is, I think, because I think that if you don't have an experience, if you don't grow up with an experience with people who are different, if you grow up in a very homogenous world, it's hard to be a bridge builder because you don't even literally have the experience to know where the bridges are, what the pieces of the bridge are. And so you become more of maybe like an explorer. So I think bridge building really, but I will say this, I do think that even if you grow up in a homogenous world and you're not naturally a bridge builder, or you don't have the experiences that make you a natural bridge builder, I think you can become one by seeking out the experiences that can make you a good bridge builder. And what I mean by that is seeking out experiences that push your comfort levels, that push you into places where you're going to experience people or cultures or places that are completely unlike yourself. I think you just have a little more work to do. But if you are willing to seek out those kinds of experiences, then I think you can also be a bridge builder. But I think it's really hard to be one if you don't first have those experiences that are very different from your own. I knew I was on the right track when I was talking to this man named Joe Wilson. I met him in Arkansas. We did one of our big art shows and dinners there recently, and he said this, and I had to write it down because I was like, this is it. Oh, I should actually describe Joe Wilson first, because he's just this amazing person who is uber conservative. He knows that I'm uber lefty. He immediately agreed to meet up with me. He showed up at our coffee date. He was wearing a cowboy hat and he has a truck with a gun rack in the back. Like, definitely not a person that I would probably normally hang out with. And he almost kind of fit this cliche, but then I fit a cliche too. I'm wearing my fleece and I don't know, like whatever people from East Coast liberal elite places wear. Like, I'm sure I looked that part as well. But here we are sitting in a coffee shop in Northwest Arkansas, and he says this to me when I asked him if he would participate in one of my cross-political dinners, and I was also asking him for more help in recruiting people who were on his side. And he said, "Y'all count me in. The sooner we start seeing how much the same we are, the sooner our lives will benefit." And not that I didn't expect him to say that, because what I have found out is that most people in America want to talk to each other and want to actually engage and have relationships with each other in a more meaningful and positive way. But I have to admit, like, even after having done this work for 3 years, when he walked in the door, I had this little moment of like, oh no, what have I done? Like, is this really gonna work? Are we gonna get into an argument right here in this coffee shop? And that's what he said to me, and it changed, that moment actually changed everything for me to say, every person I meet has the possibility to be part of this process of re-engaging with each other across the political divide.